Imagine this. You're walking down a crowded street. It's early evening, and the world is alive with movement. Horns blare in the distance. Shoes click sharply against the pavement. Lights flicker behind glass storefronts. Everyone is going somewhere. Fast, wrapped in coats, clutching phones, laughing at things you can't hear. They look fine, better than fine. One woman's smile is radiant. She's probably in love. A man checks his wristwatch, his suit impeccable. Clearly someone who has things under control. A teenager bounces to music in his headphones, mouthing the lyrics with careless joy. But then, a strange thought slips in, uninvited. What if none of this is real? Not the buildings or the weather or the people, but the masks they wear. What if behind those confident strides, those polished exteriors, and those ordinary conversations, there are fractures so deep they're almost invisible? Not even to the people themselves. Pain that has woven itself so intimately into their identity that it no longer screams. It just exists silently beneath everything. What if the brightest eyes conceal the darkest despair? You lock eyes with someone for half a second, a stranger, indifferent, and feel it. Something is off. Their face is neutral, maybe even pleasant. But their gaze holds a depth, a kind of emotional gravity, as if somewhere inside them is a room full of unshed tears, abandoned long ago. You don't know their story. You never will. But in that instant, you sense the truth. The deepest pain is the one no one sees. It doesn't announce itself. It doesn't cry out in alleyways or bleed on the floor. It doesn't beg for help, not because it's strong, but because it has long stopped believing that help is possible. This kind of pain doesn't speak in words. It speaks in silences. In the way someone avoids eye contact. In the too eager laughter that feels rehearsed. In the way someone hesitates before answering, weighing what can be said without unraveling. And you carry some of it too. Think back to the moment you smiled when you were breaking. The night you stared at the ceiling, certain that no one could ever truly understand the storm inside you. The times you walked into rooms filled with people and felt more alone than if they were empty. You remember, don't you? That hollow ache that didn't come from any wound you could point to, but still cut deep. So here's the paradox. We live in the most connected time in human history. We share photos, tweets, stories, updates. Every fleeting moment of pleasure or pain can be broadcast instantly. But somehow, despite this, the realest parts of us remain hidden, intentionally, unconsciously, or reflexively buried. And the deeper the pain, the more expertly we learn to conceal it. Why? Why is it that the pain that should be shouted is often the one we swallow? Why do we feel compelled to hide the very things that make us most human? Why does the world reward the facade and punish the truth? And what happens to a soul when its suffering is never seen, never heard, never held? Imagine a person carrying a suitcase they cannot open, filled with memories they can't face. Now imagine millions of people walking beside you, each with their own invisible weight, smiling as if it isn't there. Society calls it strength, endurance, maturity. But what if it's something else entirely? What if it's quiet surrender, not to healing, but to hiding? We admire those who keep it together. We applaud resilience. But resilience without release is rot. A smile without truth becomes a mask that tightens until it chokes. What do we lose? What do you lose? When the world never sees what's most wounded in you. You've been told that pain is something to overcome, something to defeat. But what if that's not the point? What if pain, especially the silent kind, isn't a battle to win, but a truth to understand? What if your suffering, unspoken as it is, carries wisdom the world has forgotten how to hear? Because here's the terrifying possibility. The pain no one sees isn't just the deepest, it might be the most important, the most real. And if that's true, then hiding it doesn't just protect you, it erases you. But where does this silence come from? How did we learn to carry wounds in secret, as if the soul were something shameful? Who taught us that vulnerability is weakness? You feel it now, don't you? the gravity of the question pulling you inward, deeper. You've worn masks. You've walked streets with your heart in pieces, smiling. You've seen others do the same. And somewhere in all of that is the beginning of the truth. Let's go there. So where does it begin? This need to wear the mask, to bury the pain so deeply that even we forget its shape? The answer is not simple. It lies in a labyrinth of psychology, philosophy, and the culture we were born into. But one truth is undeniable. We are trained systematically, subtly, and from an early age, to fear the rawness of our own humanity. Let's go back. You were a child once. There was a moment, perhaps many, when you cried too loudly, expressed too much, or wanted something too deeply. And in response, someone, maybe a parent, a teacher, a friend, told you to stop, to toughen up, to calm down, to be good. And in that moment, you learned something dangerous. Your emotions are only acceptable when they are manageable for others. From then on, the lesson deepened. Vulnerability began to look like a threat. Sadness became something shameful. You began to hide your tears, not because you stopped feeling, but because you feared the cost of being seen in your full fragility. You wanted approval more than you wanted honesty. You needed safety more than truth. Carl Jung once said, "The most terrifying thing is to accept oneself completely." That terror begins not in adulthood, but in the smallest moments of childhood, when the self begins to split. The outer self, which adapts, conforms, performs, and the inner self, which feels too much, knows too much, and must be silenced. And the silencing isn't random. It's cultural. We live in a civilization that glorifies productivity over presence, image over substance, comfort over truth. In a world driven by appearances, we are not taught to ask, what is real? We're taught to ask, what looks good? So we learn to curate our lives the same way we curate our social media profiles. Filters, captions, carefully selected moments. Always the best angles. Never the breakdown at 3 a.m. Never the existential crisis in the middle of a crowded subway. Never the hollow stare in the mirror when you're not sure who you've become. We internalize this way of being until it's second nature. Until authenticity feels like rebellion. Until honesty feels unsafe. Philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre believed that much of our suffering stems from what he called bad faith, the self-deception we engage in to avoid the anguish of freedom and responsibility. We pretend we are things, defined by our roles: employee, parent, friend, citizen, because it's easier than facing the unbearable truth. We are not things. We are conscious beings, haunted by the freedom to choose who we become. And what is pain, if not a message that our soul is being betrayed by the persona we're forced to maintain? Friedrich Nietzsche, too, saw through the illusion. Invisible threads are the strongest ties, he said. Pain, the kind that festers in silence, is one of those threads. It binds us not only to our past, but to every mask we wear to hide it. But perhaps the most damning force of all is what Viktor Frankl, a Holocaust survivor and existential psychiatrist, pointed to as the great crisis of the modern world: a loss of meaning. When pain is public, when it's acknowledged, named, ritualized, it can be transformed, can serve a purpose. But when it is private and denied, it becomes corrosive. It sits beneath the surface, leaching life from within. That's the hidden architecture of silent pain. Not just the hurt itself, but the meaninglessness of it. And society doesn't help. We've replaced community with competition, depth with distraction, healing with hustle. The world doesn't ask, "How are you really?" It asks, "What have you achieved lately?" So we smile, push forward, keep busy, because slowing down would mean feeling, and feeling would mean facing the vast, echoing ache we've buried beneath the noise. Arthur Schopenhauer, the great pessimist, wrote that suffering is the fundamental essence of life, but even he acknowledged that denying pain does not free us. It imprisons us. When we pretend to be fine, we sever ourselves from the very parts of our humanity that make connection, love, and transcendence possible. Here's the tragedy. You were never meant to carry it alone, but you do, and so does everyone else. Aldous Huxley, in Brave New World, imagined a society that eliminated suffering by eliminating depth. People were engineered to be happy, sedated by shallow pleasures. But in doing so, they lost their capacity for meaning. Pain, it turns out, is not the enemy. The denial of pain is, because pain is a signal, a language, a truth teller. When ignored, it festers. When hidden, it distorts. When rejected, it returns louder, more twisted, more insidious. Think of all the ways this silent force has shaped you. The friendships you never pursued because you felt unworthy. The moments you said, "I'm fine," instead of, "I'm breaking." The choices made out of fear, not desire. The dreams abandoned because somewhere deep inside, you believed you didn't deserve them. And now think bigger. How many wars, betrayals, addictions, and acts of cruelty are fueled not by evil, but by unacknowledged suffering? This isn't just personal. It's collective. We are a species traumatized, pretending to be whole, smiling in boardrooms, laughing on camera, dying inside, but something in you resists. Something in you is reading these words and feeling a quiet recognition, a trembling at the edge of something real, a voice that says, "This isn't who I truly am, and this isn't how it has to be." You felt it, that quiet rebellion rising from your chest, that intuition whispering that your pain, no matter how hidden, is trying to show you something, that perhaps the parts of you you've most feared are also the keys to your liberation. But if that's true, if there is something sacred buried in what we've been taught to hide, what happens when we stop hiding? What would it mean to actually face the pain, to listen to it without shame, to speak it aloud in a world that punishes truth? Would it destroy you or set you free? That's where we're going next. But first, understand this: the world you see, the people around you, the systems you live in, the life you've built are all shaped to some degree by this buried force. The pain that no one sees is not just yours. It is everywhere, and it is shaping everything. By now, you've felt it, this silent weight pressing beneath the surface of your awareness. But here's what's more terrifying than the pain itself. What that pain does to your life when left unseen, unnamed, and unhealed. You think you're surviving. You call it coping or staying strong. But slowly, quietly, it begins to mutate the shape of your existence. Not through chaos, but through subtle sabotage. The kind no one else notices. The kind you might not even notice yourself. You smile at the right moments. You laugh when you're supposed to. You work hard. You check the boxes. But beneath all that, something feels off. There's a low hum of emptiness that follows you from room to room, from relationship to relationship. You could call it numbness, or disconnection, or a kind of quiet dread. That's the first consequence. Disembodiment. You begin to live in your head. You rationalize instead of feel. You plan instead of presence. Because to drop into the body is to feel the grief, the rage, the longing you've hidden for so long. And so life becomes cerebral. An endless loop of managing impressions, tasks, and appearances. Your body becomes a machine, your soul a background noise. But here's the catch. You can't selectively numb. You can't mute sadness without also muting joy. You can't suppress vulnerability without also blocking love. You can't ignore pain without slowly severing yourself from everything that makes you feel alive. This is how people become ghosts in their own lives. You see it all around you. The man who always seems slightly detached, even with his children. The woman who laughs too loudly, then goes silent when the conversation turns serious. The friend who's always busy, always productive, but hasn't looked anyone in the eye in months. They're not cold. They're not shallow. They're protecting themselves. From what? From the pain that still lives inside them. The pain that has been denied so long it no longer has a name, only a shadow. And it gets worse. Because this unseen pain doesn't just distort how you feel, it warps what you believe. This is the second consequence. Identity corrosion. Over time, you start to define yourself not by who you truly are, but by who you've had to be in order to survive. You become the caretaker, the achiever, the comedian, the intellectual. Roles you've mastered, masks you wear so well that even you forget they're masks. But beneath them is a different self. Fragile, yearning, terrified of being seen and rejected. Carl Jung warned that whatever you repress does not disappear. It returns as fate. The parts of you exile do not die. They live in the background, distorting your reality. That unresolved pain becomes your lens. You stop trusting people, or you trust the wrong ones. You sabotage intimacy just to avoid the vulnerability it requires. You lower your expectations of life, not because you lack ambition, but because you've learned it's safer not to want too much. The world doesn't recognize this as trauma. It recognizes it as personality. But it's not personality, it's adaptation. And while the world keeps turning, you live a version of your life that is only half real. You may even become successful. People admire you. You're dependable, composed, maybe even envied. But inside, there's a voice whispering, "This isn't me. This isn't what I really want." You may not even remember what you want anymore. That is the third and most dangerous consequence. Existential detachment. You become alienated not just from people, but from yourself. Life becomes a performance. Moments blur together. Relationships feel hollow. And even when nothing is wrong, everything feels off. And yet, you don't fall apart. That's the cruel brilliance of it. You function. You perform. You manage. Because breakdown is punished in this world, but quiet self-abandonment, that's rewarded. That's called strength. So the pain festers in silence. But this pain has to go somewhere. And if it cannot come out as truth, it will come out as distortion. It will emerge as addiction, not just to substances, but to validation, to noise, to screens, to work, to anything that keeps you from feeling. It will emerge as chronic illness because the body remembers what the mind refuses to feel. It will emerge as rage, sudden, inexplicable bursts of fury that shock even you. It will emerge as apathy, where nothing excites you, not because life is meaningless, but because your pain has drained your capacity for wonder. It will emerge as depression, not always as sadness, but as fog, as heaviness, as the sense that something essential is missing, and you have no idea how to find it. The worst part? You begin to believe that this is just who you are, that you're not someone in pain, you're just tired, broken, not good with people, not built for love. And so the cycle continues, and it doesn't stop with you. Entire cultures are built on this denial. Capitalist systems that commodify people, educational systems that reward obedience, not self-awareness. Workplaces that reward burnout, media that sells perfection, families that pass down silence as love, religions that shame desire, governments that criminalize weakness. We've mistaken numbness for peace, performance for identity, success for healing. And in doing so, we've created a world where everyone is starving for truth but terrified to speak it. But what if that silence were shattered? What if the very thing you feared, your pain being seen, is the thing that could begin your liberation? What if facing the darkness didn't mean falling into it, but finally finding the door out? There is a rebellion beginning, quiet, slow, but unstoppable. It doesn't march in the streets. It starts inside. It begins the moment someone decides to stop pretending. When someone chooses to feel fully without apology. When someone takes off the mask and says, "Here I am, unhealed, but real." And suddenly the walls begin to crack. Not just in your life, but in the world itself. Because this pain isn't just an individual problem. It's a collective emergency. And healing it requires something radical. Something the world won't expect. Something that goes against everything you've been taught about strength, identity, and survival. Are you ready? Then step forward. The rebellion begins now. You don't escape a prison by decorating your cell. You escape by first realizing you were never meant to live there at all. This is the beginning of your rebellion, not a loud one, not the kind that needs slogans or flags, but the kind that starts in secret, in the stillness, in the terrifying moment when you stop running, when you turn inward toward the very thing you've spent your life avoiding, your pain. This is not weakness. This is not collapse. This is resistance, because in a world that rewards dissociation, presence is a radical act. But where do you begin? First, you must understand this. You've been hypnotized, conditioned by a society that told you to prioritize image over intimacy, achievement over alignment, and comfort over truth. You were taught that strength means silence, that resilience means endurance, and that healing is something linear, logical, or Instagrammable. None of that is true. The truth is messier, more dangerous, and far more beautiful. To break free, you must commit an act of inner treason. You must betray the version of yourself that betrayed you, the persona that kept you safe, that adapted so well, that survived in the desert by learning how to thirst silently. You must grieve them, not because they were false, but because they were incomplete. They served their purpose. Now you outgrow them. You don't start this rebellion with a new habit tracker. You start with honesty. Unfiltered, unflinching, inconvenient honesty. Ask yourself, what am I pretending not to feel? What part of me have I disowned just to be accepted? What truth would I speak if I knew no one would leave? Those questions are not gentle. They are weapons. They cut through illusion. They shatter the myth that you have to be someone else to be loved. And in their wake, something truer begins to emerge. But be warned, breaking free will cost you. You will lose relationships built on your silence. You will grieve the identity you've constructed so carefully. You will feel disoriented, exposed, raw. But that rawness, that's not weakness. That's the birth of presence. And presence is where all transformation begins. Look at the mystics, the rebels, the outliers, those who woke up from the dream and refused to go back to sleep. Rumi, who wrote poetry not about perfection, but about longing and spiritual wounds. Frida Kahlo, who painted her pain with colors the world couldn't ignore. James Baldwin, who turned suffering into sharp truth that cracked open the soul of a nation. These people didn't transcend their pain. They descended into it and came back carrying light. You can too. But to do that, you must let go of control. Let go of the idea that healing is a destination, that freedom is found in fixing yourself, that you must become someone better to deserve love. You don't heal to become worthy. You heal because you already are. That's the paradox. And here's another. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is fall apart. Crying in your car, shaking in a bathroom stall, telling someone, I can't do this alone. These are not moments of failure. They are sacred thresholds. Because when you stop resisting your pain, you meet it. And when you meet it, you realize it's been trying to speak to you all along. Pain is not your enemy. Pain is data. Tells you where you've abandoned yourself. Tells you where you're out of alignment. Tells you where love must return. The rebellion, then, is not about becoming invulnerable. It's about becoming intimate with your inner world. That means turning toward your body, not as a machine to be optimized, but as a living archive of every feeling you've stored. It means creating space to grieve, not just losses, but the parts of you you've denied for decades. It means reclaiming your voice, not the polished one, but the trembling one that says, this hurts, and means it. And it means community, not surface-level connection, but raw belonging. Spaces where masks come off, where someone sees you, truly sees you, and doesn't flinch. Because here's the thing, you can't heal alone. We were wounded in relationship, and we heal in relationship. Even now, as you read this, there's a part of you that wants to retreat again, to close the tab, to get back to normal. But there's also a part of you, the deeper part, that is still here, still reading, still hoping that maybe, just maybe, this could be real. That part of you is not naive. It is ancient. It remembers a time before the masks. It remembers your real face. It's been waiting for you to return. So how do you begin? Not with a grand plan, but with one honest moment. Maybe you call someone and tell them the truth. Maybe you sit in silence and feel what arises. Maybe you write a letter to the version of you that kept it together when everything was falling apart. And you say thank you and goodbye. These are not small acts. They are seismic. Because every time one person chooses to feel instead of perform, to speak instead of hide, to slow down instead of numb out, a crack forms in the illusion. A new possibility opens. And if enough of us do it, the world itself begins to change. We stop praising false strength. We stop punishing vulnerability. We stop building lives we secretly want to escape from, and we start building something else. A world where emotions are not liabilities, but guides. Where pain is not hidden, but held. Where being human isn't a flaw, it's the point. This is your rebellion, and it doesn't have to look impressive. It just has to be real. Because once it's real, everything changes. But there's still one thing left. One final truth. The insight that redefines everything. The realization that makes all your pain make sense. Are you ready? Then step into the last and deepest part of this journey.